Okay, so I promised you something about game mechanics. Let me get a share screen going here. So, um, game mechanics. These are not people who fix your broken game, um, and they don't have a lot to do with the kind of nuts and bolts things of implementing games. A game mechanic refers to the designed game player relationship that um, that defines the game's challenges. These are the player's actions, their motivations, their goals, various feedbacks that we'll talk about, and rules. They're more than just actions, they're things that we want to do. And for what it's worth, this is based on a chapter in Holistic Game Development with Unity by Penny DeBly. It's a book that's now out of date. It was for Unity 3, I believe. So games are repetitious. A game is often a loop, a repeat until exhausted loop where a challenge is presented, the player does something, the state of the game changes, the state of the game is assessed, win or lose, gain points, lose points, and the player either succeeds or fails at that challenge. And so this repeat loop goes on and on and on. We can, if we're coding this, we have a do while loop, an infinite loop, where the challenge is presented. Within this do while true loop, we've got to repeat until the player succeeds, where they take the action, the state changes, the state's assessed, and so forth. And I'm sure you've encountered this kind of game in your play. Each encounter with an enemy is kind of this little challenge, and they fight the enemy until they either kill it or it kills them, and then we go on to another challenge. In the larger game mechanics, sort of the big picture of the game, we can break that larger game mechanic down into smaller mechanics that see our player repeating essentially the same tasks. You have to clear a level, or if you have to find the treasure or something like that. And each smaller mechanic is kind of a mini game in itself, but of course not something that you play for days. So we want to talk about what it is that does make us want to play a game for many, many hours. And part of what draws us to the video games is that video games tap into our natural abilities, talents that we as humans on the planet have developed as survival skills. One of these skills is pattern recognition. We seek out patterns in the world and recognize these patterns. And this allows us or helps us to make decisions where we have incomplete information. We don't know the whole story. We just have kind of partial information. And we can make decisions on that based on our recognition of the patterns. Sometimes this is called intuition. And various brain scientists have said that our brains actually reward us with a jolt of our happy chemical, dopamine, when we make sense out of chaos, when we organize things. So what makes games fun is that they engage the human mind by presenting it with challenges that it's designed to achieve. There's a book, A Theory of Fun for Game Design, that goes into a lot more detail on this. So this repetition and pattern matching, these are things that we're designed for. Now, another primary mechanic is searching. Searching is a basic human process, cognitive process, that involves our perception of an environment and our scanning of an environment, looking for something. We kind of take mental snapshots of the world, scanning for items that match our internal representation of what it is that we're looking for. We don't have a gold coin in our hands. We have a mental picture of a gold coin, and we're scanning the world for gold coins. Sometimes we need to remember where it was, since we either didn't need it when we saw it or we weren't permitted to take it. Sometimes we'll see a key, but it's not something we can pick up. Later we see a door that's the same color as the key, and this triggers the idea that we need to go back and find the key that had the color that matched the door. And this brings us to the next primary mechanic, matching. And matching is part of searching. It's identifying one object to be the same as or similar to another object. And as I mentioned in searching, that other object is our mental image of the object. So in the game, we sometimes put things together because they're parts of a whole, or they have similar color, like the key and the door, or they have some kind of shape that matches, or they have some kind of characteristic that matches. A key and a door kind of go together. Another mechanic is sorting, the process of making order out of chaos, getting things organized. And once we have things sorted, it makes life easier. It removes some of the cognitive load of dealing with the environment and performing tasks. It can be sorting things by size or by color or by species, age, name, or even having tasks that have to be performed in a particular order. You have to find the key to open the door. The door is a task that leads you to another level. Another primary mechanic is chancing. Chancing is the reliance on random, or in the case of computers, pseudo-random events. Lots of games involve dice, spinners, drawing cards, and in computers, random number generators. We have a class of random number generators in Unity, all for the purpose of sorting, selecting, or dividing. We use chance to make decisions within the game, and those decisions, often whether we live or die, are called risk. We can have competition among individuals. Two players joust, and the winner is decided in some cases by chance, a random number. In games, chance determines the probability of some future outcome, so there's a risk involved. We don't know ahead of time how it will turn out when we approach this thing. The greater the risk, the higher the neurochemical reward. Look up gambling addiction. Another mechanic is mixing. Mixing involves combining actions or objects to achieve some goal that's otherwise impossible. A number of you have presented me with games that involve jumping from one platform to another, and you have to combine two actions to jump across the gap. You have to simultaneously run and then jump to clear the gap between your platforms. It can also be putting together parts of an object that are found, of course, by searching and matching, putting them together to create some new object that solves a task. Putting together the key and the door opens a passageway to a new level. Timing is another fundamental mechanic. We all run on time. In a game, we can have a time limit on how long a task can take to be completed. we can time a task and award a score based on how much time it takes. Or you can even force a player to wait out some amount of time for something to occur. This last thing builds anticipation, and it forces a player to be patient. Probably one of the most compelling mechanics is progressing. This progressing is central to our human condition. We grow up, we graduate from school, high school, we hopefully graduate from college. At some point we get a job, and at some point maybe we're promoted. So in life, we progress. And in games, we start off as beginners, and as play progresses, we become more proficient in the game, we become experts, and the game can, and this grants the players a feeling of achievement that makes them want to keep playing. Often, this kind of progress involves some kind of reward system. As players play longer, their powers expand, they gain new capabilities. And you can also see this as progressing through various levels of a game, various different scenes or stages of the game narrative. And they may get progressively more difficult, but our player has become more proficient and has perhaps gained extended capabilities or powers. Capturing and conquering. Capturing is taking something that belongs to somebody else. In many games, this is the primary mechanic. The whole point is to capture enough points to win, or to defeat enough enemies to clear a level. It's about outdoing or destroying. But victory may be just that you get something, you get a big house in your game, or access to a car, or even just getting your initials on the high score list. These are all conquering things. Getting your initials high up on the high score list, of course, means you're better than anyone else. In games, we have the mechanic of avoidance, where we have to stay away from something, something that's harmful to us. We as humans have learned not to eat certain bright colored mushrooms. Early on, we learned not to touch the hot stove, not to touch the fire. In the game, the player avoids items and situations that harm their character. But in a game design, instead of telling them that what they can and can't do, one can penalize them for doing something that they will then learn to avoid. So you remove points or health when they step on the mine and penalize them. This avoidance places constraints on the player action. Once they've learned that they can't step off the path, that then diminishes their health, they'll stay on the path, and you can then lead them around in the game. So it places constraints on the player. I've kind of already talked about collecting. Collecting is natural to human behavior. But it only works as long as there's a purpose for collecting. And this, of course, goes along with the whole searching mechanic. Sometimes we collect items because they give us points. Other times we collect items because we'll need them in the future, health potions that later you'll use to revive your character after the fight with the big boss. All of these are collecting mechanics. Now, no game is based on just one mechanic. If you've got a matching game where you match them by color, that's not really a game. But if you've got some amount of time in which to match as many as you can, there's a challenge, a goal, and a reward. And so there's a point to the game. Balls are kind of ubiquitous in the real world. We've got so many different games that involve shooting, hitting, bouncing, stacking, balls. The list of games that involve balls goes on and on. We as humans seem to be obsessed with these little round spheres. And part of the reason, I think, is that when we play with balls, we learn how to handle them. Our play with the games through trial and error, we progress. So balls are kind of a natural mechanic in games. Racing is another mechanic. This can be one or more players attempting to get from one place to another, an actual physical race against the clock, a race against each other. So here you can add timing, who has the best time in the race. And of course, the other player may be a human in a network game, another human player, or an autonomous character or AI. Racing doesn't have to be vehicles in a track. It can also be performing tasks, such as completing a level or solving a puzzle. Avoidance and collecting. Avoidance involves players deliberately not interacting with a specific object. Don't touch the poison sphere. Don't fall into the hole too deep to get out of. Whereas collecting is kind of the opposite of avoidance. The player must interact with the object, touch the power up, locate the hidden door to the next level, whatever. We should provide visual cues for items to be avoided and to be collected. With the little gems that we used for pickups, green and blue gems are attractive. Red gems might be associated with danger. Sharp, prickly objects are associated with things that can harm us. And apparently anything that's the color of gold is attractive to people. Gold coins are all over many, many games. Searching, the process of scanning an environment for specific objects. This is basic human attribute. Hunter and gatherer societies were basically searching and collecting societies. Finding the keys that unlock similar matching doors. Finding clues that reveal who the villain is. Locating power-ups or potions that restore health or award us points. Searching. Rewards can be points. They can be access to new levels of the game. They can be virtual tools that are used in the game, food, clothing, money, health. They can be kudos, getting your name on the high score list for the glory of it. Votes from other players, friends that you obtain in the game. And as we reward and penalize our players, we don't do this just necessarily at the end of the game, but we want to do this throughout the game as a way of providing feedback. And the feedback can be both positive and negative, as a way of influencing our players' behavior. And by doing this, we're actually teaching the player how the game is to be played and how to be played better. So that they can progress. So this feedback, positive feedback is where you add something, and negative feedback is where you take something away. This is a common misconception. And these can be used to indicate success or failure. You tell your player whether they've succeeded or failed based on this feedback that we give them, either by adding something or taking something away. Think of adding points, taking away health. There's a psychological discipline called behavior management, which has the concept of operant conditioning. And this is a technique for teaching relevant behaviors to voluntary participants. And the voluntary is key here. Voluntary is people who want to be conditioned. And these people are open to being taught in ways that will make them succeed. And we as game players are voluntary participants. So in operant conditioning, there are kind of official definitions of various terms. Positive reinforcement is where positive behavior is followed by positive consequences. You touch the gemstone and your points or your health go up. You do something right and something is added. Negative reinforcement is where positive behavior is followed by the elimination of a negative consequence. This term is often poorly defined in jargon. Negative reinforcement is where you take away a negative consequence when they do what you want them to do. An example is a player taking cover and the enemy stops shooting at them. So the negative consequence of being shot at is removed when they do the positive behavior of taking cover. Positive punishment is when negative behavior, doing something wrong, is followed by the addition of negative consequences. So as a player is being shot, that's negative behavior, don't get shot. So their health goes down, perhaps their speed goes down, perhaps their ability to shoot back goes down. So they're handicapped in some way. A handicap is added, positive, to punish negative behavior. And then we have negative punishment, where negative behavior is followed by the removal of a positive consequence. For example, if your player gets killed too often, you might make them wait in limbo longer and longer before they can respawn. This way they learn that getting killed too often takes away access to the game world, makes them idle in limbo longer than they should. Extinction is where neither positive nor negative behavior results in any consequence. There's no feedback. So for example, if you stand there and shoot at a tree, nothing happens. There's no consequence. Well, of course, you might run out of ammo, and that would be bad. Confusion, which is not a technique of operant conditioning, because it works against the training of a player, occurs when feedback is provided when there's no action by the player. The player becomes confused as to the reason behind the reward or penalty. So you don't want your players to be confused. When using feedback, the effectiveness is affected by a number of factors. One is saturation. If you receive the same feedback over and over again, the same reward, the player becomes less motivated by it. If you receive too many gold stars, you start to think, who cares? Immediacy is also a factor in how effective feedback is. The time between the player's action and the feedback should occur rather quickly, happens when the action occurs. There's some that don't happen to the end of the game, but that's a different way. You also want to be consistent. The feedback needs to align with the player's beliefs about the environment. If you step on a landmine and it only kills you once in a while, that's less of a deterrent to stepping on landmines. And there's also the whole cost versus benefit. Players evaluate the effort they need to spend on an action based on the potential reward. The greater the risk, the greater the reward. Hard challenges should give you bigger rewards. And of course, individual players have different levels of risk aversion, and so they'll play differently. But in general, we want to give bigger rewards for riskier actions. So the idea here is that a game, in effect, plays the human brain by providing it with tasks for which it was designed. And an understanding of what makes these game mechanics compelling and how to manifest them in a game is critical to designing a playable game. Now, in your final games, you're supposed to provide me with documentation that includes instructions for how to play the game. I have to play all your games and I need some instructions. In the best world, they're part of the opening scene of the game, but I still need a document that has the instructions for how to play. These will be in a document, a manual that's included in the game folder. And it's good if they're part of the opening scene sequence, at least telling you, you know, WASD, that kind of thing. Or it can be a help scene or a HUD triggered by some keystrokes. And in the manual, I would like an analysis of your game in terms of these game mechanics that I've talked about. So, you know, look at how you've designed your game and identify the different game mechanics. And I will include this as part of the grade. So this ends my little discussion on game mechanics. I hope this helps you, in the design of your final game here, which starts kind of soon. We start working on our final game once we finish the advanced projects. So thinking about these things as you begin to design your game, or thinking about things as you analyze the game that you're implementing, can make for a much more compelling game. So first of all, thanks for everyone who showed up for the meeting. That was great. It was a good turnout. Any of you who didn't show up, we do meet regularly for class at 2 on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. The meetings are often short if there's nothing to do, but these are the chance for you to feedback positively, I hope, positive feedback for the different things that we're doing with our game. So I'll end the lecture here. I'll stop recording and I'll see you all on Friday. Bye.